Okay. Hello, everyone. Can somebody let me know if you guys can hear us? Okay. So, Steve, I will let you introduce yourself and tell everybody about your shows, that what you do. But I'm honored to have you here. So thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be here, Amber. I love your show. I'm the voice of Missing Persons and Mysteries. That's my biggest channel. We just passed 235,000 subscribers. I also have 13 Past Midnight, which is like my spooky kind of show. We're doing 31 Nights of Halloween over there. And I've written 5 best-selling books on Amazon. Strange Things in the Wood, My Strange World, and then the National Park Mysteries and Disappearances series. I'm up to 3 volumes of that. Also co-wrote a couple of books. Wrote one with Cisco, which you and I were just talking about. We Are All Children in the Wilderness of the Afterlife, a guided tour through a haunted life. Took me about 2 years to say that without tripping over my tongue. She likes those long titles, but yeah, I'm into all kinds of things. But the missing persons and mysteries, the mystery side of that, we kind of get into the paranormal sometimes, but that's our main focus, is missing people. Figure if we can bring one person home or bring one family closure, then we're doing our job. So
absolutely,
like to spread the word, spread the awareness, boost the signal. Some of those people have been missing for decades.
Absolutely. So the cat is agreeing.
Yeah, that's Mittens. She's taken with me. She likes to sit in my lap when I'm talking. So, and then Mulder, who everybody knows, he's over here asleep on the floor. They get along pretty good. He's had a cat before, so.
So some people in here probably didn't watch the show I did a couple of weeks back where we discussed black-eyed children and if they're connected to aliens. And that's where you joined in and you were like, hey, I want to tell this story. So before you tell your story, what is your thoughts on what we discussed last time about? Do you think they could be some type of extraterrestrial?
I think they could be, because if you read like some of Whitley Strieber's stuff, he remembers seeing owls. And then under hypnotic regression, he realized it wasn't owls at all, but they were grays. So I've thought about that. And I think that what I saw wasn't necessarily children, but that was how it presented itself. And but there was an evil there. There was, if it was kids, there was something controlling them, or there was more to it than just kids. It was, I don't know, if you think about it, I mean, you have the Men in Black, and they tried that. They would send out these guys in shiny new cars that were old, and then they dressed odd, they spoke odd. That didn't work. And then they tried sending like the black-eyed kids out. Now, everybody loves kids, but these are weird kids that dress funny and talk funny and try to get in your house. Then we had the Phantom Clown Flap. That started like back in the 80s. Lauren Coleman wrote about that in, I think, 83 when he wrote Mysterious America. And, clowns, everybody loves clowns, but these are creepy clowns that come out of the woods and try to chase you. And then, I think there's, if you read The Rebirth of Pan by, I can't remember the author's name, Jim Brandon, that sort of, it talks about the cosmic trickster and how it tries to do stuff, but it doesn't quite get it right. But I've often said, if they ever come up with black-eyed bikini models with pizza and metal albums and I disappear, you'll know what happened to me, because I would let them in.
I found this really cool photo I wanted to show. I think I did a screenshot. Okay. So, if you do a quick search on black-eyed children, most of the time it'll come up like an American contemporary folklore, or, something about that. But it's not just in America. They've been spotted, and there's been reports all over the world in nearly every country. And then I found this today, and I'm not sure. It says that some people believe that this statue, and I'm going to butcher this name, Göbekli Tepe or Tape, it's Tepe, is the oldest representation of a black-eyed creature. And here's the, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's very old. It's very ancient.
And you're right, it is throughout the world. I lived in Southeast Asia for a year and traveled around over there, and a lot of those countries, they have black-eyed entities. And something that's fascinated me, I've been hearing reports lately of black-eyed adults. And I thought about that. Well, people started seeing black-eyed kids in the 90s. That's been, almost 30 or maybe even more than 30 years ago. If those kids grew up, is that where the black-eyed adults are coming from? And I've also heard reports of white-eyed entities. That's kind of new. So I don't know what that's all about. But
but if you go to the paranormal side of this, when you think about a black-eyed child, and they're a little different than just a regular negative spirit, I guess. But how many times do, especially movies, portray spirits or demonic entities with the black or white eyes? They do it all the time. So people have seen, apparitions, not just for the movies, but, there's been accounts of people seeing apparitions with hollow eyes, black eyes, white eyes. And that's kind of where those came, when you look at a drawing of an apparition or a ghost, a lot of times they have black eyes.
Yeah. And I had Donnie Cho on my show the other night on 13 Past Midnight. He's Korean heritage. And he was talking about in Korea, they have some sort of entity. I forget what the Korean words was, but it means egg-faced ghost. And it has no face, has no eyes, no mouth. And to me, that's more frightening, I think, than something that has black eyes, something that doesn't have a face at all. That's frightening to me.
Yeah. There's been a few times I've seen spirits and I'll see their whole body and their face is blurry. And they're regular human spirits, though, that just need help. But I don't know why that happens. I have yet to figure that one out. But, we're always learning. So.
Yeah. And in my investigations and rambling around and researching and stuff, I've yet to find any answers. I've found more questions than anything. So now I'm not looking for answers. I'm looking for the next set of questions. Cisco and I have talked about the paranormal being like an onion. You peel back that one layer of skin, there's just more under there, and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And Soraya Askath said it's like trying to put a puzzle together, but you don't have the box to see what it's supposed to look like when you get it put together. And then you may find out that it's 3 or 4 puzzles mixed together. So those are both good analogies, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and one person's experience with, let's say, Sasquatch, somebody else could have a whole different experience. Like it's going to be different for every single person. And I think that's what we all kind of need to understand too, because a lot of people think, well, they did this or had this negative experience with an extraterrestrial. They're all horrible. And, they're not. It's just going to be different for every person.
And then something else in the comments there, Thin Lizzie Borden, she's one of my writers, by the way. She said they're like vampire kids, and they are. They ask to come in. They can't come in. Can I use the phone? Can I use the bathroom? Something like that. It kind of falls along that vampiric traits, where they can't come in unless you invite them. Same with a lot of the demonic entities and stuff. People play with a Ouija board, something has to come through. They let it come through. If you don't know what you're doing, you can cause all kinds of problems for yourself and for others.
A lot of times we can invite things in without saying it. And that can include something as simple as a welcome mat.
Yeah.
Get out or happy holidays. Don't say welcome, come on in, because you're going to let them in without even knowing it.
Need one that say go away. Well, you've got that in Native American culture, like with the dream catcher. That's what that purpose is. The bad dreams, the bad spirits, whatever it is, gets caught in that web and has to work their way through that. I'm from down south, grew up in Appalachia. A lot of the people down there would paint their porch roofs or the ceiling of their porch a color they actually called haint blue. And that was to confuse ghosts. If they came up on the porch, they would see that and go up instead of go in. My granny was very, very superstitious. She called herself a Gypsy Witch. I don't know where the gypsy part came in, but she was a granny witch, is what they call it in Appalachia, or a kitchen witch. But she lived in this big old farmhouse that had the old keyholes, like that you had to use a skeleton key to get in. And she would poke garlic in the keyholes, and she said that was to keep witches or spirits from coming in the house. Same in the Philippines. I had an apartment over there, Western style apartment, and I had a housekeeper that was from out in the jungle, out in the province, and she kept closing the windows. And it's hot over there. The average temperature in the Philippines is in the 90s, and it's very humid. So I'd have the windows open. She'd close the windows up every night, and I'd open them back. She'd close them again. And finally, I said, "Why do you keep closing the windows?" And she said, "Oh, Mr. Steve, with all due respect, there's witches that live in the trees out there, and if you keep the windows open, they'll come in the house." And she was sincere in her beliefs. So I just bought a couple more fans and left the windows closed.
And they also those glass bottle trees are used for that purpose too, and people use them for decoration and don't really know, but that's what they're used for as well, to keep the haints away.
Yeah, I had Eric Freeman Sims, who does the Unseen Paranormal podcast. He was my guest the other night. We talked about the bottle trees, and then also touched briefly on witch jars, which I watched a guy on YouTube that has like a metal detecting channel. He dug up a witch jar in the woods. And it wasn't a live stream. It was pre-recorded. And everybody's like, no, don't open it. But he opened it up, and he's like, there's some weird stuff in here. There's hair and stuff written on paper. And a lot of times those have like bodily fluids and stuff in them too. It's where they've done some kind of spell. So there's all kinds of stuff like that. Oh,
yeah. There's a lot of things that people grew up with, like different traditions that are actually a form of a witchcraft that they don't even think about right now. And then
it's just
others for it.
That was me, but like my granny, she told fortunes, she read tea leaves and coffee grounds and animal entrails. And that was our normal, we didn't think anything about it. But they had a farm, they had a dairy farm, and they also raised livestock. And every year in the fall, when they butchered hogs, she'd pick out one that she would call hers. And when they butchered that one, she would poke around in its guts with a stick, and was able to discern what the growing season would be like the next year. And according to my uncles, her children, she was as accurate as the old farmer's almanac. And down south, they live and die by that old farmer's almanac. Most houses you walk into, they've got a copy of it hanging on a string on a nail somewhere in the house, usually in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So she was that accurate. Now, they had come out of the spiritualism movement of the turn of the last century. When my mom was little, they regularly held seances, did table tapping. They talked to spirits and things. And it was almost a form of ancestor worship for them. And you have that in some of the Asian religions, Shintoism and some of that. They build temples for the spirits of their ancestors to live in these little tiny temples and things. So, and they're much more accepting of the paranormal over there. I found out on the evening news, sometimes you see stories of a possession at a school. They go to a girls' school. There's a little girl laying on the ground, talking with some kind of weird voice and all this. But again, this wasn't a paranormal show. It was just the evening news. Or they'd go to a haunted school where they'd see an apparition of a little kid on the swing set. Again, on the evening news, not a paranormal show. And it was just an accepted part of life. I mean, they have white ladies and all kinds. They've got a vampire type creature. They've got ghosts. They've got all kinds of different things. Similar to the Hat Man, they've got a guy that smokes a pipe and lives in mangrove trees. And it was an interesting place. And I went to one island over there called Siquijor, which is literally the island of witches, island of fire. And there's black magic there. There's white magic there. They've seen all kinds of cryptids and stuff. I'd love to go back and shoot a documentary there someday.
I would love to go with you. That would be awesome. But paranormal is still in the same sense as humans. You have good, you have bad, you have really sweet ones, you have buttholes. It's just like people.
Just like people.
Still a good side.
If somebody was a butthole when they're alive, they're most likely going to be a butthole when they return in spirit. Some of them are even worse, I think.
Yes, they can be. Yes, absolutely. Like I could tell when I connect with spirit, like if this person was just a jerk in life or if they were just like this sweet person, absolutely. So let's see. Do you want to go ahead and get into your story?
I'll go ahead and get into it. It's kind of lengthy. I give a lot of detail, a lot of background, but I don't think I'll ever write it out because when I tell it, I relive it and I get nervous. My hands sweat. It's almost like a form of PTSD. And no matter how good of a writer I ever become, and I'm not I think I'm a passable writer. I think you have to be a great reader to be even a good writer. So I read a lot, but I don't think I could ever convey the actual feeling of the story like I do when I'm telling it. But it was mid 90s. I was working for a company that did, it was a medical management company. We had 35 remote doctors' offices, and I was responsible for the computer networking of said. And back then, that was before you really had people with computer science degrees. You didn't have the Microsoft certifications, the A+ certifications. It was stuff I taught myself. It turned out to be a marketable skill. And then I moonlighted. I would do network stuff like as a hired gun. And I'd been hired by another place down the road, a comprehensive breast center. They were going from having dumb terminals at all their location or all their desks to actual PCs. So I was installing the network there, and I would go in the evenings after they were done. So that way I didn't get in their way and they didn't get in my way. I'd go in, say at 6 and work until 2 in the morning or so, just enough time to go home and sleep for a couple of hours and then go to my regular job. I'm a lifelong insomniac. I rarely sleep more than 2 hours a night, but I've used that to my advantage. I've been able to live at least 2 lifetimes. So, but anyway, this place had hired me to read or set up their network, initial computer network, and I put in a bid and got the job at $100 an hour. And at 90s money, that, I mean, even today's money, that was great, but that was incredible back then. Mm-hmm. So I was in there and I was getting close to finishing. I just had a few more days work left to do. I was coming out. It was about 2:00 in the morning. At the time, I drove a little Mazda Miata, and I had all this network equipment with me. I had a spool of Cat5 cable. I had a tone generator, all this stuff that I needed to do my job. So I'm coming out with an armload of stuff. Locked the door behind me. I had keys and codes to the alarm. Of course, it's in a industrial area, but there was other medical stuff there too, but it wasn't a residential area. So I'm coming out, empty parking lot. The only car out there is mine. I'd left the top down, and I'm trying to fit everything in the trunk. And if you've ever seen a Miata, the trunk's not much bigger than the glove compartment on some cars, the spare tire and the batteries back there. So I noticed when I came out over at the far end of the parking lot, there was 2 little girls sitting over there on the curb. And I thought, well, that's weird. It's 2:00 in the morning. There's not any houses over here. I wonder what that's all about. I normally keep myself to myself, mind my own business. I started packing my stuff in my car, and then I looked over, and they had gotten up and had walked about a third of the way or so across the parking lot towards me. And I could hear talk, but I couldn't tell what they were saying yet. And I never actually saw them move. That was a weird thing. But every time I'd look up, they'd be a little bit closer, but they're standing still. And then at some point, the next time I looked over, they were under a street lamp that was there in the parking lot. And they were dressed in very simple clothes, like dark or black colored jeans, hoodies with the hoods up. And this was in the summertime. Like I said, I'd left my top down. And at that point, I could hear what they were saying. There was a taller one and a smaller one. I'm guessing the taller of the 2 would probably be around 12 or 13 years old. The shorter one, I would think maybe 8 or 9. But the taller one is talking, I mean, nonstop. And she's saying stuff like, he'll let us in. He won't leave us here. It's dark. It's cold, but it wasn't cold. We're all alone. It's the middle of the night. There's nobody out here. He'll let us in his car. He'll have to take us. He can't leave us here. And by this point, I'm getting kind of spooked. I'm hurrying. I'm trying to get my stuff in the car and get out of there. And the next time I looked up, they were almost up to me. The one had never stopped talking, just chatter, 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 something, just a litany of stuff like I was saying there. And I didn't say anything back. I was trying to get in my car, and for whatever reason, even though the top was down, I'd locked the doors. And I fumbled. It had the billet door handles. I fumbled trying to get in. Finally, I just jumped over the door into the seat of the car. And by that point, they were right up to the edge of the car. Literally, they could have got in the car with me. And when they were under the streetlight, that was when I observed that they had no eyes. It was just pure black in there. So I'm already freaked out. And even if they weren't black-eyed kids, I'm not going to let 2 underage kids in a car that's built for 2 people at 2:00 in the morning and drive around.
Right.
Like I just wouldn't do it. And I fumbled trying to get it started. I finally got it started. It roared to life, and I just floored it. I was parked up at the curb in this parking lot, and there was a lawn that went down through the place. I jumped over the curb, drove down through the grass, and took off out of there. Left them standing there, the one still talking, and it was that whole, like a fight or flight type thing. The fear that was rolling off I mean, it's ridiculous to talk about it. Now, it was two little girls, but it was in a parking lot at 2:00 in the morning. They didn't have any eyes. I mean, it was blacker than black where their eyes should have been. And I took off. At the time, the girl I was dating only lived a couple miles from there. And usually if I worked late, I'd go to her house and spend the night so I could make it to my regular job on time. But that night, I actually went the other direction, went toward my parents' house, which was about 20 or so miles away. And the whole way down, there's Pellissippi Parkway. Anybody that's from Knoxville, ever been in Knoxville, knows what I'm talking about. One direction takes you to the interstate or the airport. The other way takes you into Oak Ridge and the National Laboratory and all that out there. I'm tearing down Pellissippi Parkway, and I kept looking like over my shoulder and looking in the mirror and looking in the seat. I had this irrational fear that they had gotten in the car, or they were hanging onto the spoiler, or they were going to be running alongside the car. Just thoughts that didn't make any sense. And I know I was doing 90 and 100 miles an hour, but I wasn't worried about the cops. Cops would have been a welcome at that point. I get all the way to my parents' house, and instead of parking in the driveway, I drove all the way around behind the house and parked under a tree, went inside, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night like peeking out the curtains and out the front window and the kitchen window and stuff. And the next morning I called in sick to my regular job, and I didn't go to sleep until after daylight. So again, whatever it was, there was an evil presence about it. I could feel it just coming off of it in waves. And that was why it scared me so bad. It was, like I said, now telling it sounds silly. It was two little girls in a parking lot, but it wasn't little girls, or at least whatever was controlling them was evil, right, or had an evil presence about it. And I thought about that. It wasn't until just a year or two ago I heard somebody else telling my story. And it was the first time I'd ever felt any kind of pity or sympathy for those little girls. I kept thinking, those poor little girls, because it wasn't them. If they were even real, it was whatever was controlling them. They didn't have a choice in the matter. And I've had people ask me, have you ever seen them again? No. Would you want to? Probably not. But there is a part of me that would kind of like to, because I think I'd be more prepared this time, and I might react differently instead of just running like a madman. But it was true. It wasn't even fight or flight. It was just pure flight. I couldn't wait to get away from there.
Now, did they actually have their hands on your vehicle?
No, they never touched the car. They were right up to the edge of it, but they weren't against it. They didn't touch it, but they could have literally opened the door and stepped in, or hopped over the door like I did. Right. And the one never stopped talking. She was still, when I drove away, he'll let us in. He'll have to take us with him. He won't let us out. So she was still
repeating that after you started pulling out?
Yeah.
Wow.
When I got in the car, when I was trying to start the car, when I got it started, literally when I pulled away and drove down through the grass, I could still hear her.
Did the little one never talk?
The little one never said a word. She just stood there.
Because you would think, like, if it really were two children that were lost, it would be, can you help me find my mommy? Can you help me find my daddy?
Yeah.
I need help. I'm lost. I'm not lost.
And that's kind of the unusual part about it, because in a lot of the black-eyed kids encounters, they will talk to you and not about you. She was just talking about me to the other one. That never said anything to me. Can you help us? Will you help us? He was saying, he'll have to help us. He'll have to let us in. And then that was the standard. It was just the same thing over and over and over. It was like a litany, or maybe even a recording or something. It was so strange. And
so you knew there was something up whenever that happened.
Yeah, I knew something was up when I first came out and saw him sitting over there. I thought, that's not normal. That's kind of weird. But then when they started walking toward me and not saying anything, and they would stop. When I looked, they were just standing there. I'd look away, I'd look back, and they were closer, but I never saw them walk or move. But when they got under the street light, which was maybe 50 feet away from me. That's when I could see under the hoodies and see that just emptiness, just blackness in there. It's like an inky black, like being in a cave or something. It was that type of black where the eyes should have been. But otherwise, they looked normal, maybe a little ashen, pale. Their clothing was almost identical. Like I said, dark jeans. I don't remember the shoes, but it seemed like it's just some kind of just plain dark colored. It wasn't tennis shoes or anything like a kid would wear, but hoodies that were a lighter color than the pants, but still dark. Hoods pulled up. And again, this was in the summertime. I've been riding around with the top down. It wasn't cold out by any means, but that's what one of the things she kept saying was, it's cold out here. He won't leave us. He can't leave us. He'll have to let us in. And if she'd actually, I believe it was 96. I know my daughter was small. She was born in 1990, and it was prior to 2000. I hadn't had the Miata long. It was between 96 and 98 for sure. And you'd think I'd remember the exact date, but sadly, no. Yeah. But
I can't remember dates hardly at all either.
Yeah. So. And it was just so traumatic. I mean, right, I'm sitting here now and my hands are sweating. You can probably hear it in my voice because it gets easier every time I tell it. The first time I ever told it on the old Art Bell show, I was a mess. And then I told you there was weird stuff happened after the show. Mm-hmm. Now, your audience didn't hear that, but yeah, I was on Art's, one of the other incarnations of his show. It wasn't Coast to Coast. I think it was Midnight in the Desert. He's had a couple of different ones, but he was sick that night. His producer, Heather Wade, was doing the show, and it's one of her first times doing it live instead of him. And she and I are friends outside of all that, and she knew the story, and she kind of goaded me into telling that. I was on there talking about my book instead, and I told it. And it was cool because on one of the many commercial breaks, Art actually called in to tell her she was doing a good job. And he's like, I really like that Black-Eyed Kid story, Steve. So I got to talk to Art Bell on Art Bell's show, but he wasn't there. So I loved the man. And I lived in Nevada for a long time and always wished after he passed away that I'd gone over the hump into Pahrump, as they say out there, just a few miles, and visited. He had a compound out there. But I don't know if he welcomed guests or not. But that night when I told it, I think I was on there 2 or 3 hours, and that was like the toward the end. And I finished up, got ready to go to bed, and I was living in Portland at the time, and that house had motion detectors. It had a perimeter alarm, and had all kinds of lights and things. I could tell if anybody was even coming up the sidewalk. And all of a sudden I hear out on the front porch a scream, and it comes into the house without opening the door, continues through the kitchen or through the living room, into the dining room, into the kitchen, and then there's a screened-in back porch. It went out that way and faded down earshot. And I thought something had happened to my daughter. I was in the bed, and I ran to her room. She was living with me at the time. I flung the door open, and I'm like, Jessica, are you okay? And she was fast asleep. And she's like, yeah, why? And I said, didn't you hear that scream? And she's like, no, but I told you, don't talk about those damn black-eyed kids. And then other times I've told it, I've had paintings fall off the wall. I mean, like all of them, like 2 or 3 fall off at the same time. I've had knocks on the door when there was nobody there.
So I have a question for you then. Sure. So do you think that scream you heard, do you think it is directly related to the children's energy, or do you think it could have been something in the woods like a banshee or some other cryptid hollering out?
Just because of the other things that have happened every time I've told the story, I think it somehow ties into that. I don't know exactly how. Another night I had a glass bowl of wax fruit sitting on a table. It shattered into a million pieces. I've been on shows where their equipment would suddenly freeze up. They lose control of their computer. And then I've had people tell me, I was listening to you tell that story, and this happened at my house. And that's another thing, like you were talking about. You can accidentally invite stuff in. I've had people talk about watching something on TV, like a ghost thing or possession thing or something, and then they have encounters in their house. It was like just the mere act of watching it invited in. And the Cherokee, I'm part Cherokee, And the elders will caution you. There's certain things that you don't speak of by name, and there's even certain things that you don't think about because they can use that energy to come to you, whether
Mm-hmm.
you intend or not, kind of like a tulpa, a thought form, but it's by thinking about it and concentrating on it, you can cause stuff to happen. Walter Gibson, the guy that wrote the old shadow mysteries that were on the radio back in the 30s and in the pulp magazines. I mean, this guy, he wrote all the time. He had typewriters. He had 6 typewriters, and he would literally go from typewriter to typewriter to typewriter. And he put so much, literally, blood, sweat, and tears into writing these stories. He called it a mental impression. But he had the person, Lamont Cranston was the Shadow's name in the show, and he wore a big black coat and a slouch hat and a red scarf. He actually had an entity start showing up in his apartment in Greenwich Village in New York, and Hans Holzer has looked into that, and
Mm-hmm.
Dave Schrader from Darkness Radio, they were going to go have a look at it for the Holzer files. But he started seeing this person that he'd created in his apartment. He said he was having a dinner party one time, and there was like a gallery up above to the upper rooms, and people saw it up there and said, "Oh, that's cute. You hired somebody to dress up like the Shadow." And he's like, "No, that just appears here." And he said, "I've literally sat and wrote and thought so much about it that I created it out of the ether." And there was North Carolina, or UNC, University of North Carolina, they had one of the first parapsychology labs in the country. And they did that as an experiment. And I can't remember the name of the book they wrote about it, but they actually made up a ghost. They would sit together, they would describe what it looked like. They made up a backstory for it, how it acted, things that it did. And they actually started having things manifest. Things would happen, things would apport, they would hear rappings, things would move, they're seemingly on own accord. So I believe that that can happen to a degree, that mind is a powerful thing. According to
Absolutely.
experts and people like that, we only use about 10% of our brain power. So imagine what you could do with 40 or 50% or 90%
Yes.
of your brain power. You might be able to move things or create these entities. And I think sometimes that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Poltergeist situations like that, they found a tie into that with girls going through puberty. A lot of times poltergeist activity will be in a home where there's a female child that's just entering puberty, and
Mm-hmm.
stuff will start happening and manifesting. So is there a link there? Who knows? But it seems probable.
Yeah, I was watching a video not too long ago, and this person was explaining that, we're made up of atoms. Like your fireplace is made up of all these atoms, but they don't take shape until we look at them, which is hard to get that concept in, right? It's because
Right.
we know what it is. We know what you look like. We know what things look like. And that's literally like 1% to 2% of all reality is
Yeah,
what we're
that's
seeing.
like
And when you're not looking at it, it's just wavelengths. So
I,
imagine what we're not seeing.
I took classes like that in college, and we studied about Schrodinger's cat, where he had 2 boxes. He put a cat in one box. There was nothing in the other box, and he mixed them up. But then he theorized that until you opened the boxes and saw which one the cat was in, there was actually half a cat in each box, which, I mean, that's mind-blowing to even consider that. But that theory, I mean, that's true. It's till you know that it's either neither or both. There's no getting around that. And then even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, and I referenced this in a video recently, that once you eliminate the impossible, whatever's left over, no matter how improbable, is the correct answer. And that makes sense. So a lot of this is just, it's eliminating the impossible. And then you have the power of the mind and things like that factor into it. And it's just, it's truly mind boggling to try to get your head around some of this stuff that, but I know people that regularly claim to manifest things and
Mm-hmm.
people, and sometimes it works. It depends on your intention and your power and
Mm-hmm.
things. But I've known people that have manifested things or claim to have.
Yeah, I always tell everybody meditate and manifest, because our words are so powerful.
Yeah.
And we typically only think of it like, a lot of us use it to the bad part of it. Like when you're always negative on yourself, you're not going to get that job. I'm never going to get out of here. I'm never going to get out of
Absolutely.
this relationship.
I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah,
You've
you're
already
set it in
set some.
stone.
set yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Bible tells you that the power of life and death is in the tongue. You can speak good things to yourself, you can speak bad things to yourself, but whatever you confess, that's what you're going to have. These people that get up, oh, today's going to be a rotten day, today's going to be an awful day. You've already named it and claimed it, so get ready for it.
Right. We have to start speaking of things, even if we don't have that amazing job yet or that amazing house. Say it like you have it. Say, you know what, I'm going to put this rug in my living room because I'm getting it. You have to think and speak of it as if you already have it.
Yeah.
And that's how we can change our thought process.
There's
if people knew how powerful their thoughts were, they'd never say anything negative again.
Yeah. And there's a thing I've heard of in college called the backwards completion principle, where you convince yourself that something has already happened, and then you work backwards to the things that led it to happen, and then you can make it happen. And I've even known people that would go out and make a recording of a place, that where they wanted a job, like an audio recording, and think, I'm standing in front of the building that I work in. It's this. I have this job, and then again, then you play that. And believe that, and you can fool your brain. It's easy. I used to have a friend that was amputee, single below the knee amputee, and her phantom leg would itch. Well, you can't scratch it if there's nothing there to scratch. Scratching the prosthetic didn't do anything. But what she figured out, and I thought this is brilliant, she took a small mirror and leaned it up against the prosthetic leg. So in the mirror, she was seeing her actual leg. Well, she would watch the mirror and then scratch the leg that she had left. But what she was seeing in the mirror was her scratching the leg that wasn't there anymore. And that satisfied the brain, like, okay, it was itching. You scratched it. It doesn't itch anymore. And that's amazing. And if you've ever seen any of the Carillion photography where they've taken people that are missing digits, and they've got this process that I'm not sure the science behind it, but under Carillion photography, a person's digits or a leaf that's had a piece cut off of it, when you look at the energy outline that shows up in these photographs, it's still whole. Even though part of it's missing, the energy is still there.
Right.
And you get into all this heady stuff, with the Schumann response, or the resonance of the earth, that every living thing vibrates at a certain frequency and stuff. I think everything it's all connected in some way or another. And that's like the ley lines and things that you have in Great Britain, how those power spots, whether it's Stonehenge and other standing stones and ancient sites and stuff, they're literally along these energy lines that crisscross the globe.
And thousands of years ago, and speaking of like the Stonehenges and different, like if you go back to cave drawings and different things, you could like artifacts and stuff you can find, people did this stuff. They manifested, they talked to their ancestors, they did all this stuff with spirit. And they knew something. They knew what was going on. I think they were so much closer as a society than what we are now, because we let technology and life and we're so focused on being busy that we are so disconnected from our own self, like our selves.
And they had to get that knowledge from somewhere. I'm just a few miles down the road from the Aztec ruins, and then Chaco Canyon. There's a set of ruins down there, and you go and look at that, and you look at these. I mean, very primitive people. They had no tools. They didn't have computers, certainly like that, but yet they knew how to build something square and to stack stuff so that it would stay there without any mortar other than maybe some mud or something. And then they abandoned all of it. That's the weird thing. I mean, some of these places, they went to so much trouble. At one time, you can tell that was a thriving center of activity. Hundreds, if not more, people lived there. And then all of a sudden they just left. Now out here they claim that there was a multi-year drought, but I have my doubts about that. I'm right in the edge of the Navajo Nation reservation. Animas River is right down here. That went through where those ruins are. I don't think that river ever dried up. I don't think the drought was ever that bad, because it still snows up in the mountains. We have the monsoon out here, the river floods. So I don't know. But something happened to those people. I just can't understand anybody going to all that trouble and building all that. I mean, it took decades to build, I'm sure. And then just like, well, we got to go. And we covered a place like that in Alaska, a place called Portlock, really remote place. The only way to get there is by boat or seaplane. It was a whole village that just suddenly disappeared. They dug up their dead and took them with them, but they left their rifles behind. They left their food behind, even left dogs and horses behind to starve to death. Why did those people leave in such a hurry? Now, there is a story about a Bigfoot type creature there that's been spotted. Maybe something like that scared them off. I've even had people theorize that they didn't dig up the dead and take them, that whatever this creature was dug the dead up and did something with them after these people were gone. But the entire village just left. And there had been a cannery there at one time, and this is in the 1800s, but just it's a mystery. That's one of the things that I love.
And you got to think even farther. I mean, I'm sure it's been further back in the 1800s, but at one time, there were these cryptids that roamed around with humans, and nobody was trying to hunt them and hurt them. And, you know, you have dragons and you have all these other things in the sea and land that were here, and now they had, you know, just like a lot of the Bigfoot and Sasquatch, they're hiding for the most part. You can go find them.
That's another thing that you have throughout all cultures. It's in all the Native American culture, like the Cherokee. They had their hairy giants. They had their little people. You have that in the Pacific Northwest among those tribes, the First Nations people up there. You have it in other countries. You have the Fae. And some of the Celtic regions, that's almost a religion, or was, may still be. But that's the thing to me that's most fascinating about that. The Fae it kind of ties everything together. If you start looking into the different types and the hierarchies of Fae and elemental beings, and there's stories from like the 1800s of little men in a horseless carriage that came out of the sky and landed and talked to people. That's a UFO encounter. There's stories of hairy giants that came out of the woods and either scared the people or stole their food, or in some cases with the natives, they made peace with them and they were just considered a separate race of people. But it crosses all boundaries. And same thing in Asia and all countries I've been to. I've literally been around the world a couple times. I've set foot on every continent except Antarctica, and I don't have any plans to go there, but I would like to go, just step off the plane, then get back on and leave, just to say I've done them all.
You got to get behind the ice, behind all of that, and then there's the other.
I'd literally like to see the top of the world or the end of the world there. The only thing that I would want to do there is hunt meteorites, because on that tundra, if you find any kind of rock, it came from space. Everything else is so far frozen under that there's not going to be any rocks on the surface. But
yeah, I've heard people that go there don't really come back. So
hear that too. It's like that in Alaska. Speaking of Portlock there, Sandy and I, we travel together for the channel. She's my traveling companion, bodyguard, private duty nurse, all kinds of different things, in addition to being my channel manager. We've got plans to go to Alaska, and we found a guy that would take us to Portlock in a seaplane. But he said, you know, I'll take you there and let you off, and I'll come back and get you, but you're on your own if you're going to spend the night. He's like, there's a reason people don't go there. So one of these days, we'd planned an Alaskan cruise this year and didn't get to it because of some other stuff that was going on. But eventually I'll go to Portlock. I don't know that I do want to spend the night, but I do want to go there and look around and then shoot some stuff on location. We do a lot of that. And I enjoy that. I've been to Mount Rainier a couple of times. I've been to Olympic National Forest, Olympic National Park, a lot of those places in the Mount St. Helens, a lot of those places in the PNW where people were missing. We visited those locations and made videos. And now that I'm out here, we've got plans for the Four Corners area on over into Arizona. Can't wait to go to the Superstition Mountains. That's been a dream of mine. And we did a video recently about a place in Canada, the Nahanni Valley, also known as the Valley of the Headless Men, where people go missing, and when they do find them, they don't find the heads. They've never found a single head, although they found a lot of bodies with the heads removed. So something's collecting heads. I'd like to go up there. And that happens in the Superstitions as well. They've found a lot of headless bodies out there with no explanation. So
now I want to ask you a question, and this kind of goes back to the missing persons. Okay, because I have my own opinions, but I wanted to get yours. So do you feel that when it comes down to we all know there's a lot of missing persons in national parks, and a lot of those, a lot of the times they say it's due to like a Bigfoot. Okay, I've heard that so many times on so many different news. It's like there's a Bigfoot here. This thing took it. What is your opinion on that?
Well,
do you think Bigfoot kind of gets blamed for stuff they
I
didn't
don't
do?
think it's just one thing. I think it's several things. There's human predators, there's animal predators, and then there are examples of stuff where there is a tie-in with Bigfoot, with UFOs, with possible portals, the Fae, the creature that they call the Glimmer Man, or the predator-like creature where it's cloaked, and then people can kind of see it looks like it's shimmery. You can see through it, but it is a being. Bruce Maccabee's wife, Jan, now he's a UFO guy. She was deer hunting and was in a tree stand and saw one moving through another tree. And at the same time, she was witnessing that at a football field just over the way. Everybody there saw a UFO. They had some kind of UFO encounter. So I think, in a way, it's all tied together. Now, the animal predation and the human predation, that's separate. But there are people that go into the woods with the intention of never coming back out, unfortunately. But the thing that even gets me about those cases, a lot of times they don't have time to get very far into the woods, and to be able to get yourself into a place to let yourself perish where nobody can find you, that's going to take some doing. That takes a lot of thought, a lot of study. I mean, there's places where they've gone in and searched for literally weeks and not found any trace. And some of the ones that are really unusual to me is where they find something, but it's unusual. Like there was a guy that went missing he'd been out hunting. It was a snowstorm, and he had actually taken off his boots and walked several miles in the snow barefoot. And then when they finally found him in the spring, he was within sight of a cabin that was occupied. It looked like he had just sat down on a rock and simply disappeared. The pants were there, bones were in the pants, bones were in the shirt, the feet bones were still in the socks. He was missing his boots because he had left them, but they said it looked like he just simply sat down and all the flesh melted off of him. So there's a lot of weird stuff out there too. Some of it has explanations, and then some of it, I think there's definitely a supernatural element in there.
Yeah. Earlier, like before we went live, I was telling you that sometimes when I see those people's pictures, I'll get images of how they passed away. There's been several times that I've had images of, like FBI cover up, like they're in on it. And I get those images that they're, those people were never there. They just say they were there and we can't find them. You know what I mean? Like I usually don't talk about this stuff, but that's what I get those images. And like, I know when that happens, and it's so hard because they're out there telling these families that they have no idea, but they've done something.
They do know. Yeah. We hear that a lot of times, especially with the national park cases, that the Park Service and the park rangers, they're complicit with covering a lot of it up, because some of those places like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park near where I grew up, that's the most visited national park in the world. Even with the pandemic and things going on, it's still got 12 million visitors. And if you tell people, well, there's something in the park that's taking people, there goes all your tourism dollars, and all this, the Gatlinburg would fold up, Sevierville, Pigeon Forge, all those tourist attractions, that would all go away. But it's like the case of little Dennis Martin that went missing on Father's Day in 1969. They never found a trace of him. But I know a guy that lives in the Smokies, and he's getting on up there. He's in his 60s or 70s, and he swears that back in the 30s, before it became a national park, the government hired some of his relatives to go in there and help thin these creatures out. Now, some people claim it's some sort of Bigfoot or a hybrid. Others claim it's like these inbred cannibal hillbillies that just live way back in the woods. And I've had people say, oh, you couldn't get far enough back in the woods that nobody could find you. I just say you haven't hiked in far enough. I've been to some places that probably no human has been, at least in a long, long time. And then you have somebody like Eric Rudolph, the abortion clinic bomber. He hid in Nantahala National Forest for over 5 years when he was on the top of the FBI's most wanted list. He hid in the woods and had no outdoor or survival experience. So if somebody that knew those woods and was raised in those woods and grew up way back there, it'd be easy for them to not be discovered if they chose to be.
Absolutely. And then you have to consider there's feral people that are raised there. There's the moonad people, like they're people that are good with the woods. And speaking of woods, Dark Woods has a question for you.
Yeah, I saw that. Cryptids, black-eyed people, UFOs. Mm-hmm. I think there is a connection. I think anything supernatural or cryptid or beyond our realm of understanding and explanation, I think it's all connected somehow. And if you can find a copy of that book I mentioned, it's called The Rebirth of Pan by Jim Brandon. It's out of print. It's hard to find. If you really want a copy, I'll send you a PDF if you email me, stevestockton81@gmail.com. And the only reason I don't mind doing that is it's out of print. You can't find it. And if you can find it, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But he's got some other good books. Weird America's another one. That was my Bible when I was a kid. It was like a tour guide for the adventures. He went through every state and talked about all this weird stuff that had happened there. And as a kid, I couldn't wait to grow up so I could visit some of these places. And I've visited a lot of them, but that book's hard to get as well. But I think there's a connection there. We're talking about the ley lines and the energies and stuff. I think there's good energy and there's dark energy, and it's all connected or interconnected somehow. Now you can talk about string theory and all that, and get into the real heady quantum physics and stuff. But I do believe there's a connection to everything. I don't believe in coincidence. I think things happen for a reason. You may only see it in hindsight if you ever see it, but I think stuff happens as it's supposed to happen. Sometimes I think things happen. It may just be meant for one person to see, but other people happen to see it.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
My grandmother tell me that because I asked her about some of the stuff I'd seen and heard. And she said, well, sometimes you'll see things that's just meant for you. And you may or may not be able to interpret what it's supposed to mean. But sometimes you may see something that's meant for somebody else and you just happen to see it. Doesn't have anything to do with you, but you were a witness to it. And that, I'm like 8, 9, 10 years old, and that blew my mind. But she knew things she had absolutely no way of knowing, and that used to scare me. She looked like a witch. She had arthritis. She was all humped over and her hands were gnarled. But one time we were on the way to her house, and there was a place we had to pass through where decades earlier, some kids were playing ball in the yard. One of the little boys ran out in the street after ball, was tragically struck and killed by an automobile. Well, I could sense that place when I drove by it. I remember one time we were headed to Granny's. I was laying in the back seat. This was the days when you didn't have to wear seatbelts and stuff. I rode all the way to Michigan one year from Tennessee, laying up in the shelf in the back window. But anyway, I was in the back seat reading a comic book, and I just felt that little weird tingle. I looked up. Sure enough, we were passing by that place where the kid got killed. Well, I didn't say a word about it. I just went back to my comic book, got to her house, and like I said, she lived in this big old Victorian pile of a farmhouse. And what had once been a big formal dining room, that was her sewing room. She liked to quilt. And she would take me in there and tell me all these legends and lore and superstitions and stuff. And the reason being me, I was her favorite grandchild. When I was born, down south, they call it having a veil over your face or caul over your face. All it is the afterbirth. The amniotic sac was over my face, and they had to cut it away. But in her superstitious mind, that made me a special child, and I was able to see ghosts. I don't know. She had told me a bunch of stuff, but she would always get me in there in the quilting room away from everybody else and teach me stuff and have me repeat it back to her. And if I did it to her satisfaction, she'd give me a candy bar or a crisp new dollar bill. It was exciting when I was a kid. But that time, like I said, I hadn't mentioned it to my parents. Certainly hadn't mentioned it to her. We just got there, but we were in her room, and she was trying to teach me something or other, some old folklore or way to get rid of bad luck or attract good luck or keep the evil eye away or something. But anyway, she said, you feel things. And I thought, well, yeah, like I have feelings. And she said, no, I don't mean like that. She said, like that spot on the highway on the way here tonight. And my jaw dropped off, and it's like, She was reading my mind. She literally had knew or felt what I felt or something. I can't explain it. And I didn't ask her to explain. I was too gobsmacked. And I was thinking, she can read my mind. And that scared the crap out of me. But little stuff like that would happen. Said she told fortunes. I had a lady come to me years later. She was an adult. She said, when I was a teenager, me and a couple other girls walked over to your granny's house to get our fortunes told. And she said, on the way there, I was telling the other girls, like, I'll go along with you just for fun, but I don't believe in all that crap. She used a different word. Well, she gets there. They knock on the door. She welcomes them in. She has them sit in the parlor. And she said, I'll tell your fortune and I'll tell your fortune, but I won't tell yours because you don't believe in me. And again, she had no way of knowing that was said. The lady that told me said that was miles from her house. We walked several miles to get there. So she knew things, and I don't know how she knew, but she knew.
Earlier, and this is right before you told your story. Well, let me ask you a question first. Now, did your grandma used to keep her hair a little bit longer?
Yeah,
Like
and she'd wear it up on her head. Like when she went to bed at night, she'd put it in a ponytail or even pigtails sometimes.
Because before you told that story, she almost manifested completely right behind you.
But,
I got a glimpse of her.
I've got pictures of her on my phone. I'll show you one.
What did she ever have a wooden cane, or what's a reference to like a wooden cane?
That was my grandfather, her husband. When he was
showing me a wooden cane.
When he was a child, his cousin or his uncle, one or the other, was like throwing him on the bed and he was bouncing. And he took a bad bounce, bounced off the bed, hit the hardwood floor, and broke his hip. He was just a small child. They never set his hip correctly, and he walked the rest of his life with a limp, and he carried a cane. And I've got his cane and fedora, so that's definitely Granny because
she's definitely just letting you know, hey,
nobody knows.
She knows she's still around, but she's definitely still around you.
Nobody knew about that. Now she had curly hair.
Yes, it has a wave to it. Yes, I see a wave in it.
It was naturally that way. Let me find a picture of her here. But yeah, she was a pistol. She was born, I want to say 1895. I was a late in life, unexpected baby. My parents had already raised my brother. He was grown and married out of the house, had his own family by the time I was cognizant of anything. My dad, had he lived, he'd be 101 this year. So, yeah, my grandparents were around. I mean, they talked about knowing Civil War veterans and things like that. So
does your daughter have abilities?
She does, not to the degree that I do. It seems to skip a generation. Like my grandmother had all this. My mom didn't have hardly any of it, and then I got a lot of it. And now my mom was one of 10 kids. She had 9 brothers. She was the only girl. So I could never get by with anything. She knew every boy trick in the book. But some of my uncles.
Your grandma's making me feel like she's very powerful, and I get that that energy. But she's like, Steve can do more than he's telling himself. Okay, you can do more than you can, and she's talking about your daughter having abilities too. She just needs to kind of harness in on them if she wants to use them. But she said she's very powerful too.
Yeah, and it's something like I said. I don't claim to have any powers or claim to be able to do anything. But
you do claim it.
I do have flashes of precognition. I've had dreams that come true. I've dreamed or heard entire conversations that later were said back to me word for word. So there's stuff out there. But again, I don't claim to have any powers, but I feel things. I can sense things. This house where I live here now, there's at least 3 spirits here. And actually, I dug into some research and found out that back in the 80s, there was a lady that lived here that was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and she didn't want to go out that way, and she took an overdose and died in the back bathroom floor. And you can feel it back there. There's a heaviness to it. And I'm a Christian. One morning I was praying, and I heard a voice, not necessarily in the room with me, but maybe on the other side of the door, just as clear as a bell, and it was angry, and it said, "God gave me breast cancer." And I immediately rebuked that spirit. No, God didn't give you that. God comes to exhort, edify, comfort. Satan is the one that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. God didn't put that breast cancer on you. and I haven't had anything else out of her in a while. But she's angry at God, and that's why she's afraid to cross over. She doesn't know what awaits over there because I think she cursed God for putting
Yeah.
that on her, and I don't believe it works that way.
Yeah. You may be able to help her, kind of get over there. Just
Yeah, I've Cisco Murdoch and some other people. They're going to come out to visit, and they're going to cross her over. That's something. That's I've never even tried that. I have no knowledge of that, but that's
it can,
something
it can be as
Cisco
simple as
does.
you just saying, "Hey, look, if you," because I've crossed over spirit that doesn't believe in God. People have different religions, and that's when I use like I'll say something like, do you want to connect with your mom? Do you want to see her again? Your grandma, you bring in their family members sometimes. If they don't want to go, they're not going to. But
Yeah,
sometimes they're kind of like, yeah, I think I want to go there. And it could just be as simple as you asking this light to open up for her. You know what I mean? And her
yeah.
going over.
There was a guy that kept coming to me in my dreams one time, a guy that had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And I called Cisco and I said, "You got to help me find a body." This guy had ran off the road, was mortally wounded, and crawled up under a cedar tree and died. And I thought we were trying to find the body, and Cisco was trying to help me because I could see stuff in the dreams, the landmarks and things like there was a smokestack made out of brick and a river, and I could tell it was somewhere in the south. Well, she contacted a friend of hers that's very psychic. Cisco hadn't even told her what any of this was about. And the first words out of the lady's mouth were, "Stop looking for the body of the motorcycle," because that's what we were trying to do. And this guy, he had been part of a motorcycle club, a not very nice one, and he'd
Mhm.
done some things he wasn't proud of, and he was afraid to cross over because of what his mom was going to think about him. But Cisco and this other lady crossed him over, and
Yeah.
when he crossed, they said there was a little old lady came and didn't take him by the ear like a mom would do. It wasn't an angry thing. She took his arm and they went off into the light. So,
Hmm.
so there you go. That's why
Yeah.
he was. That's why he was afraid.
Yeah.
He
There's
didn't.
some that'll go, some that kind of don't want to go. And then there's been a few kind of negative spirits that I've been like, think of this as a bar. You ain't got to go home, but you can't stay here. You either go or you
Yeah,
go somewhere else,
I can't remember who. I think it was John the Baptist or one of those people said the dead don't return, but sometimes they stay.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I
every
think that's
house,
something you could do. You could practice, and I think that spirit, the lady you said is kind of angry. She
yeah.
aggravates your grandma too. Like your grandma's fed up with her too. She's like, get her out of here.
Well, I get these things. I call it my granny senses, and they tingle. Like Spider-Man has his spider senses are tingling. I have granny senses, and when something doesn't feel right, I get that little tingle, the hair on the back of my neck or whatever. So I've learned to listen to those tingles, and that
Hmm.
it's almost a gut feeling. I've learned to go with that. That's probably the most accurate. And sorry, I'm trying to find a picture
Oh,
of my
you're fine.
grandma here to show you. I've got a lot of pictures on my phone, but yeah, I know she's around me. She's with me. She doesn't talk to me in an audible voice, but I hear stuff in my head in her voice. I've been in some situations where, like, I want to go get a better look at that. And I hear my granny say, "What you need to do is turn around and get your butt to the house. That's not anything you want to mess with."
Yes.
And if I've learned to listen to that because
Yeah.
she hasn't steered me wrong yet.
Her energy reminds me of somebody that's literally not going to take any crap from anybody too. Like
That
she's going
that
to be very
that
strong,
was something that was said that my grandpa wasn't afraid of anything except maybe grandma.
right? I can see that.
And I
I
promise
can
I'll
see that.
find this here, and I'll even show you a picture of the cane if I can get to it. But we can just keep talking while I'm browsing through my phone here.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, she was powerful, and she wouldn't read tarot cards. She said there was a dark energy to those. She liked coffee grounds, tea leaves, and she had a pack of what the Gypsy Witch fortune telling cards is
Oh my
what they
gosh,
were
Steve,
called.
maybe your grandma and I are like we should be besties. Like I have those exact cards. I don't
and
do tarot. I do Oracle
and hers
and
is one of
all
the
that.
original. They still make them, but hers is one of the original decks from back in the
Mhm.
20s, I think. And they're similar to Lenormand cards if you've ever seen her use those. And she would also make her own. She could take a regular deck of playing cards and she would draw little symbols and pictures and stuff on it that meant stuff to her that were very similar to the Gypsy Witch cards. But
That's awesome.
she was something else.
Yeah.
And she died when I was 13 years old. And like I said, I was scared of her when I was little. But when she passed away, I wish I had at least another 13 years with her to learn her ways
Hmm.
and things, because she was also a healer. She knew
Hmm.
herbs and how to make all these different potions and concoctions. And I get that on my dad's side of the family too. His mom, they called her a yarb doctor, which is a Appalachian way of saying an herb doctor. And she ran the post office in Ben Stockton, Tennessee, off from the front porch of her house. People would come there to get their mail. They lived way out in the middle of nowhere. My dad would have to walk down to the train depot and get the mail bag and carry it back. But she also made herbal concoctions. She cut hair and she pulled teeth. So it's just one stop. You get your mail, get your tooth pulled, get your hair
One
cut,
top top, huh?
and she'd take care of whatever was ailing you. But
Yeah.
she taught me stuff like that if there's something in the woods, like if you're in an area where there's snakes, there's an herb that grows nearby that you can treat a snake bite with, and things like that. That anything out there that will hurt you, there's something nearby that will remedy that.
And like you talking about the healing and doing that stuff, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, this was normal. People did this. And now, today it's frowned upon for the most part. A lot of people still use natural remedies and do a lot of natural healing, but like I said earlier, we're so caught up in a rush and in society that we kind of forget our roots.
Yeah, and they had to do something. I mean, these people,
Right.
they had a 900-acre farm that backed up to what is now the Big South Fork National Recreation Area. I mean, they were hours away from anything, especially walking. Now, they had vehicles and stuff, but it was still a long drive into town. But you had to do something. I mean, and a lot of modern medicine has its basis in herbs and things like aspirin. I think birch bark. You can make
Right. Yes.
aspirin out of birch bark. There's a lot of that stuff. Those old remedies, the poultice and the salves and
Hmm.
a lot of the holistic medicine. It has its roots in that kind of stuff, and it kind of went along with the witchiness and the whatever you want to call it, paganism or whatever it was. Those women were healers. They were wise women, those granny witches. There's a story that I've read before on one of my channels, an article a woman wrote. It was one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of my grandma's side of the family, even though it was through a female lens. But she talked about how they had, the blood of the elders and the old people in there, that they weren't peaches, regardless of what their daddy told them, that they're not easily bruised fruit.
Hmm.
They're tough. Those women had to be tough, and you worked on a farm that had all those kids to take care of, and that was one of the reasons they had so many kids, was that was free farm hands.
Right.
That's so you didn't have a choice whether you were going
Everybody
to
had
work.
a job.
Yeah, you had chores to do before school. You get up before daylight and do stuff. Had to do stuff when you got home, maybe after you did your homework. But they eked out a living over there. They made it through 2 world wars and the Great Depression and then some.
Hmm.
So those mountain people are tough and resourceful. And I always like to say there's a difference between a hillbilly and a redneck. Uh, I'm a hillbilly, but hillbillies are resourceful. A lot of those people, they were from Scotland, Ireland, England, and they settled in those areas in Appalachia because it reminded them of home. One of the greatest storytellers I've ever known, a gentleman named Otto Darrow. A lot of his stories are in my Strange Things in the Woods book. He was a first generation Irish immigrant. His parents were born there. They came here, and he was born in the U.S., but they lived even farther back in the woods than my dad did. I mean, literally, they would walk and carry groceries for miles. Those were tough people, and
Hmm.
they survived tough times. We've lost so much of that with our convenience and our modern conveniences and things, that we've lost a lot of our magic, I believe, and
Absolutely.
the things that got us through. I'm still looking for my grandma. I didn't realize I had this many pictures on here, but I've got a picture of her and I've got a picture of my grandpa in here too, with that cane that she's talking about. And that was her little way of knowing that, let me know that, you're seeing the right thing there.
And they were married, right? Those two were those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I hear him say, "Well, I wanted to show her the cane, but she took it. She's like, yeah, I'll do it."
And that's good. My grandfather,
Yeah.
he was a detective for the Eldon Railroad, and in addition to all the other stuff they did, they truck farmed livestock and they had a dairy farm. They just, that many kids to feed and had to do something. So, well, maybe she's hiding it from me because I haven't come across it yet. She doesn't want
I got it now. Yeah. That's funny. She's definitely a character.
Oh, yeah. She was a pistol and just one of the most active persons. I mean, just a couple of weeks before she passed away, she was out crawling around in the barn loft looking for a hen's nest. One of the hens had got up in the barn and laid eggs. But it was at her funeral where I got the idea to tell these stories because I had a head full of folklore and stuff. And just looking at her there in her coffin, I'd never seen her so still and so quiet. I mean, obviously she's deceased, but I thought of every story she'd ever told me, every bit of folklore, every superstition. It was all right there with her because my cousins either didn't know or didn't care about any of that stuff. And I just sort of assumed that mantle on myself that I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to write these stories and then tell these tales, and they'll live on. I mean, the internet and books and things like that, they're there forever.
Right.
That'll be around long after I'm gone. And these people, they live vicariously beyond the grave through my stories and things. So I've done what I feel I was called to do in that regard.
Yeah, they both are definitely with you when you need them.
I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's one picture of her outside one of my uncle's trailer.
Yes.
But see, she looks like a witch. She's got that look about her. And see, the one with my grandpa is very near that. I think here's an 8-year-old me with my first motorcycle, and my granny looking disapprovingly on. Had a little Honda 50 mini trail, but look at that scowl. That's me over there with my mini bike and that look. You'll wrap that thing around the tree, that's the thing. But I never did. And I don't see the other picture, the one with the cane, but if I find it, I'll send it to you. But here it is. Now that's my grandfather with the cane, and his brother, my great uncle Charlie, with without the cane. But that's the cane that she's telling you about and talking about, and I have that cane. And back then, you didn't go out. If you were going into town, you wore a hat. You didn't go anywhere if you didn't have a hat. I've got his Stetson fedora and that cane that you see right there.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it's white, but it wasn't a blind person's cane. That was just he actually had several, but that one was his favorite. And you can see, I don't know if you can see this or not. She's in the background there. That's my Aunt Frenchie in the front. She was kind of my nursemaid when I was a baby. That's my grandmother in the middle there. You can barely see her with the dark hair, but that's the Gypsy Witch. But like I said, she looked the part. I was scared to death of her when I was little, but she's probably in her 60s or 70s there. But sorry that took so long.
Oh, you're fine. This has been fun.
But now, was that kind of what you were seeing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But when you mentioned the cane, I knew. Okay, yeah, that's Granny, because
there's one of them kind of making me feel like there was something with the throat, like or another. It could be another spirit too, but like there's something with someone's throat, like they're having trouble breathing or their throat's restricted.
That was probably my brother. He had throat cancer when he passed away. So, so he's in there too. I'm sure. And he was a Pentecostal preacher, so he had a lot of different opinions about a lot of different things. And but yet he was one of these, because a lot of religious people, me included at one time, thought that everything was demonic.
Right.
But it's not. And the way he explained it was, what we consider the natural, what we know as the natural, if you're a Christian and you believe in the Bible, all this was spoken forth out of the supernatural. So therefore, there's going to be stuff that we don't understand, that we can't explain. Nature and natural laws, those are man's laws. The supernatural, that's God or whoever, and those things can do whatever they want to do. They're not, they don't have to follow our rules and our laws. And that made a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he firmly believed in ghosts and spirits. He talked about when Christ was resurrected and he appeared to the apostles, Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. It's I. I've risen from the dead. I'm not a ghost. Well, why would Jesus tell the apostles that he wasn't something that didn't exist? Mm-hmm. And to me, that little bit in the Bible, that proves the existence of ghosts.
Mm-hmm. And the thing with angels, the way we see paintings, they're cute little cherubs. Most of them have like 6 eyes and 5 wings. And that's why they say fear not, because they're really scary looking.
Yeah, some of those, like the ones they call the watchers, the watcher angels. There's different angels that have different jobs, and it's kind of like the thing with the Fae. A lot of the Fae stories, people that have actually witnessed them, it's not some little Tinkerbell thing that's flitting around. It's some big, scary, like elemental looking thing that looks like it eats your lunch, or take your lunch buddy anyway.
So I keep hearing your brother say, tell him I'm sorry. And I don't know what that means to you. And that's fine. And sometimes that could be like when somebody has a disagreement with someone, or maybe you kind of had spent some time on bad terms, but he wants you to know he's sorry and he's okay and he loves you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Well, the only thing, when he was literally on his deathbed, my niece tried to get me to come, and I didn't. He wanted me there, but I didn't want to go. And I told him, I don't want to see you that way. I want to remember you the way you were when you were behind the pulpit and you're full of life and fire, and I don't want to see you on your deathbed. And he said he understood and respected that, but I really think he was angry at me about that because I wasn't there. And that's the only thing I can think of, is we didn't really have a close relationship until much later in life because he was 17 years older than me. We didn't really get close until after my parents died. I was much closer to my nephew. He was only 4 years younger than me, so he always seemed like my little brother, and my actual brother seemed like an uncle or something because he was so much older. But no, we didn't see eye to eye on everything, certainly, but we got along good. So
he wants you to know he loves you and he's okay,
Good deal.
Awesome. Well, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end this. And thank you so much, Steve Stockton.
Sure. I'm just getting wound up. I could do another couple hours, but maybe you'll have me back sometime.
Yes, we should do this again.
I'm sorry I spent so much time finding those pictures, but I knew you'd want to see them from what you were describing there. That's who was talking to me.
It's like the screen glitched a little, and it's like I saw half of her like just manifest behind you, and I'm like, there's Grandma. Yeah,
behind you or behind me?
Behind you, like behind you.
Hey, great.
The other side, but yeah.
When I come back, I've got an interesting fireplace story I'll tell about my grandma and my grandpa. I've got all kinds of ghosts and spook stories and stuff that are just family stuff, and then I've got stuff that happened to other people. But I'll come back sometime and tell you that story. Yeah,
this has been fun, and thank you to everybody who has joined us.
Thanks, all my people that are here. Thanks for coming over. I see a lot of my regulars, a lot of people from Missing Persons and 13 Past Midnight. Again, come see me, come subscribe. And my folks that are here, be sure and subscribe to Amber's channel. She's doing some good stuff over here, and we want to show our support. So be sure and subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff.
All right. Bye, everyone.
And Amber, thank you for having me on here. I appreciate it.
I'll
come back and run my mouth anytime. I like to talk, in case you couldn't tell.
Anytime. The first live stream I ever did on YouTube was on your channel. That like a year and a half ago. It was a lot when you used to do the live streams.
Yeah, when we were doing the lives on Missing Persons and Mysteries.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah. All right. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.